Hi, everybody. Welcome to essentially the midpoint of the semester. We have the midterm behind us, and I will be getting that feedback to you as soon as possible. For those of you that are done with it and looking to move on, we now get to move into lean thinking, which is near and dear to my heart. And if you've taken operations management with me, you've probably seen this content before. But this week, I want you to reflect on these concepts as they apply to where you work and what you do on a daily basis. So lean thinking, lean comes from the Toyota production system, and it does have origins in manufacturing. And for a lot of people in healthcare, that can rub them the wrong way when they first hear about it. So the IHI, which we'll talk about in this module, the Institute for Healthcare Improvement, has kind of reframed a lot of these concepts in terms of lean thinking, continuous improvement, process improvement, in a way that takes out kind of the manufacturing lingo and verbiage. And that's when I work with healthcare organizations, how we refer to it as well. So a little bit of background on lean thinking, and even more so than that, really process improvement in the scientific method. So we can go all the way back really to Eli Whitney, who really first looked at interchangeable parts and kind of led us into the Industrial Revolution. And then once the Industrial Revolution was kind of in full steam, Frederick Taylor was somebody around the early 1900s, turn of the century, that really had a huge impact on how we think about management science and how we think about improvement. He believed very strongly in the scientific method and taking that out of the natural sciences and applying it to an organization. So how do we use that same thinking of coming up with a hypothesis, testing it, taking that feedback and having that inform our next step? That was something that around the turn of the century, people just weren't doing in organizations. And he really brought, as a management consultant, he brought that to the organizations and worked in a lot of manufacturing and worked in the steel industry, Bethlehem Steel in Buffalo. He did a lot of work there. And he's called the father of scientific management, obviously, because he kind of ushered in this thinking into organization management. But there were some issues with his style. Because he believed so completely in the scientific method, he didn't always do a great job of incorporating the people doing the work, right? He believed there was one best way to do the job. And if you could do that, you could increase productivity across the board, and there'd just be major growth and profit margins would soar. But what happened is that when he believed in the one best way, designed a shovel to shovel the optimal amount of coal so as not to also deplete the energy of the person doing the work. But the expectation was that you were just going to keep doing this. And he really didn't talk to the people that were doing the work to understand what maybe was problematic with the process or things they encountered that made the job difficult. Instead, he believed that managers were basically the gurus and had all of the right answers, and the lowly frontline employees really just had to be told what to do. And so this created some major backlash, as you might imagine. And unfortunately, we still have managers that adopt this mindset, whether they realize it or not. Rather, irrespective of whether they've ever heard of Frederick Taylor before, right? They think they have all of the answers and they're super smart. And the people that are doing the minimum wage jobs on the front lines really just need to be told what to do. And that is fundamentally opposed to lean thinking and organizational improvement as we know it today. So how this has kind of evolved since Frederick Taylor is after he had done a lot of this work, the unions, there was major backlash. Even though a lot of organizations were trying to adopt this way of thinking and using the scientific method to improve their processes and to improve the organization as a whole. So then there was a couple, Frank and Lillian Gilbreth. Some of you may be familiar with Cheaper by the Dozen, which is an older book, and it was turned into a movie. It's based on this couple. They had 12 kids, and they used a lot of the scientific method and kind of these operational kind of notions and ways of improving things around their house and with their children. And they did a lot of work in time and motion studies. And so Frank, he was an engineer, he was kind of the one that had his name on all of the publications. But Lillian, his wife, even though it wasn't common at the time for women to really be in consulting positions or to have their names on publications. She was one of the first women to receive a PhD in psychology. And so you can see her influence on their work. And now we fast forward about 50 years since they really were doing these work and publishing some of these studies. She is now considered the mother of industrial organizational psychology because of the way she pulled in the psychology concepts and applied them to the scientific method as it pertains to working with organizations and individuals. And as you can imagine, right, what we've learned from Frederick Taylor is that when you're doing this work and working with those frontline employees, there is a psychological component to these people are doing this work day in and day out. They want to be involved in the changes. And more than that, they usually have the best ideas because they're doing it every single day. And when they run into things that are frustrating, those barriers, if they can openly talk about that and have ideas for improvement that managers will listen to, then the change is basically boundless, right? Because they're engaged in this problem solving and continuous improvement on a daily basis. And if they're doing this as a team, that is true organizational learning. And that's what we want to achieve in our organizations today. Edwards Deming is another great thinker in this space. He's a statistician. We'll talk about his work in terms of the PDCA cycles, which stands for Plan, Do, Check, Act, which is another way to think about just applying the scientific method. And he was wonderful not only in terms of looking at data, which we're going to talk about a lot next week, and how we understand and how we really kind of analyze data to make sure that we're looking at it in a meaningful way and not just looking at sound bites and jumping to conclusions. But he also took these concepts of William Gilbreth and did a lot of work in scientific method, but bringing in this organizational psychology piece into the work that he was doing. And he did that with Toyota and really helped them to completely revamp their business in the between the 60s and the 80s, from a company that had very cheap products that often were considered to be a very low quality to basically being one of the most profitable automakers in the world, which Toyota still is to this day. In the late 90s, the Institute of Medicine published To Err is Human and Crossing the Quality Chasm, which we'll talk a little bit about in these modules as well, and that we've referenced in the quality module. And they started ushering a lot of the same approaches from Deming, talking about continuous improvement, PDCA, scientific method, but also understanding how do we include those people on the front lines into this improvement work. And so the IHI has now, and they were the ones to publish these articles, have really launched continuous improvement lean into healthcare. And for the past 2 decades, we've seen major improvements, most major health systems doing work in this space. We know that the Mayo Clinic is doing it, who's often at the forefront. Cleveland Clinic is exceptional. Virginia Mason, we've got major health systems that are adopting this type of approach in this work. And we see it, as many of you may see in the organizations that you work with. We may call it different things. We may call it root cause analysis, which may or may not be very closely aligned, but it's basically when we have a near miss or some sort of event, or if we know we're not meeting one of our goals, we want to take this approach to understand how we can improve our organizations, and more importantly, how we can develop problem-solving skills in all levels of the organization, especially at the front lines for the people doing the work regularly. And if we're in management positions, our job is not to come in and tell them what to do and to have all the answers. Our job is to be supportive, to remove barriers, and to help support their development. We'll be talking about this more this week. And the best way as a manager you can learn how to do this is by going to what the Japanese call Gemba. Gemba is the Japanese word for the place the work is done. And so too often what we see is if there is a problem or an opportunity we want to work on, we'll have all of the executives go into a conference room. We'll talk about it. Somebody will have a PowerPoint, we'll throw some numbers up on the board, and everybody's going to have a really strong opinion about what we need to do. Somebody's going to make a decision. We're all going to feel really confident. We're going to walk out the door. And what typically happens is that we missed some critical piece in understanding the process. And the only way that we can really understand what is happening in our processes is by going to Gemba, sitting down with the people doing the work. So what this might look like is if you are, let's say, a manager in a department, and there are delays in patient access or registration, and we've got a number of patients in the waiting room and it's becoming a problem. The best way to address this is by you going and sitting with patient access. And the key to this is that you want to ask why, show respect. And so that means that you're not going to go in and basically say, what are you doing? We have all of these problems. You're going to go in and you're just going to observe, right? You're just going to watch. You're going to ask them what they do and why they do it, and to really try to learn about the work they're doing, the challenges that they experience throughout the day. And by just watching and taking data and seeing what's happening, when we can do this on a regular basis, it will completely change our management style. And it's something that I not only am encouraging you to do, but that I'm asking you to do on the discussion post this week. So your homework for this week is to find a place to go see, ask why, show respect at the Gemba so that you can learn more. And what typically we refer to is those like moments where you realize that you've completely missed something or there's an opportunity right in front of you, is those aha moments, right? So I am looking for this week for you to get one of those aha moments, and I can't wait to see what you come up with. As always, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out.